Okay, let's discuss the NHL and let's discuss the Buffalo Sabres missing the playoffs for a 14th straight season. 14 straight seasons with no playoffs. Now, this is historically bad. Historically bad. Every year they miss the playoffs, it gets worse. Now, for most of this period, fans have shown up in large numbers. They were attendance was always pretty strong because it's a traditional market. But we've had this conversation. I'm going to have this conversation. Carolina. I'm going to use Carolina as an example. Obviously, Arizona is now relocated, but Carolina is going to be the example I'm going to use because Carolina went on a lengthy playoff drought, and then ownership sold up. New owners came in, and they haven't looked back. The culture has changed from the top down. Now, Carolina, the Hurricanes, are in a non-traditional market. That's key. Buffalo's in a traditional market. Now, the same conversations were had with the Coyotes, who've now relocated to Utah. That they were in a non-traditional market and the team sucked. But they actually made the playoffs in this period, whereas Buffalo haven't. And Buffalo have not been in the playoff conversation for a very, very long time. And it's getting to the point now where none of the roster has been to the playoffs with this team. The GM has changed multiple times in this period. The head coach, it's almost every other season the head coach gets changed. There's no continuity on the bench, and there is constant chopping and changing in the front office. And that is creating a problem. There doesn't seem to be a plan to get out of this playoff drought. Because the initial plan was they missed the playoffs 14 years ago, and they're like, okay, we'll bounce back next year. They missed the playoffs again. And then they decide, okay, right, we've missed the playoffs for a couple of seasons. We're going to do a rebuild, a complete teardown. We're going to tank for McDavid because McDavid is McJesus. He's going to be the saviour. They end up drafting Jack Eichel. Now, Jack Eichel is still a world-class player. The problem is, Jack Eichel, there was that comparison when he was drafted second overall in 2015 that he was basically like McDavid, but not quite, but he's still a very good player, which he is. The problem was Jack Eichel at various points basically was the only guy carrying the team because they didn't have the pieces around him to take that next step back to the playoffs. Ultimately, Jack Eichel will be traded out the organisation. He goes to Vegas. He has the surgery he requires on his neck, which the Sabres didn't want to give him as an organisation. He goes on and wins the Stanley Cup and is a key part of why the Vegas Golden Knights win their Stanley Cup. That's got to hurt Buffalo fans. Sabres fans have got to feel dirty about that. That the franchise player they draft is traded to a future Stanley Cup winner, of which he's a key component of that team. And he wasn't the main man. He didn't have to be the main man. He was put into a team that already had a winning, positive culture. Now, since they drafted Jack Eichel in 2015, they've drafted Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power. And they are offensive defensemen. So they're not bad players. In fact, they're world-class offensive defence. They're very good going forward and also quite good defensively as well. Let's not kid ourselves. These are two superstar players on a very bad team. They've got some good players. This is not a team on paper that should be missing the playoffs. I'm being honest here. This is a team that should be making the playoffs at this point. They came close a couple of seasons ago. They narrowly missed, and we're talking narrowly missed. But the problem is, the GM keeps changing, the head coach keeps changing, and you also then have to ask the question of the AHL and ECHL affiliates, where they're meant to be developing these draft picks and these prospect players that they get in through trade, into NHL-ready players. So it's not just the Buffalo Sabres, it's their affiliate organisations in the minor leagues as well. And all this has to come from the top, the ownership. Questions have to be asked of the ownership and what they want this team to be. Because fans are starting to stay away. Now, I referenced the Carolina Hurricanes because they also had a very lengthy playoff drought. And then, I think it was about 2017, the then ownership decided to sell. And there was a lot of calls that the team should be relocated. The ownership at the time decided to sell. The new ownership comes in, and the first season the new ownership is in, they make the playoffs. A change in ownership was the solution for the Hurricanes' playoff drought. Now, the Hurricanes had been to a couple of Stanley Cup finals and had won a Stanley Cup under the old ownership, but things had clearly started to decline, and they had been missing the playoffs for the best part of a decade plus, on a similar length of playoff drought to what the Sabres are now. Not quite as long, but nearly as long. The Hurricanes decided to change ownership. Old ownership decided to sell. New ownership comes in, and instantly, from the top to the bottom, the organisation completely changed in regards of the positivity around the organisation. They get the right GM in, they get the right coach in, they haven't looked back. Now, they haven't won a Stanley Cup, but they've been regular playoff performers. They regularly make the playoffs. They've made the playoffs again. They're regularly labelled as contenders. They regularly make the latter stages of the playoffs, which they weren't doing because they weren't even in the playoffs. And it's completely changed the trajectory of that franchise. The Florida Panthers were struggling, lengthy playoff drought, or struggling to just get out the first round. They've now been to back-to-back Stanley Cup finals, winning one, losing one, and suddenly the question marks over attendance and should the team stay in the Miami metro area in Sunrise have disappeared. The team has become a success. Buffalo could end up like Arizona. Now, Arizona, ironically, in the same period, actually made the playoffs where Buffalo didn't, but ownership was an issue. And unfortunately, the team ultimately got sold multiple times, ultimately got sold and relocated. Now, the debate between the teams I've mentioned and the Buffalo Sabres is these teams are in new, non-traditional markets. The Buffalo Sabres are in a traditional market where it's one of two sports get played. We're talking NFL with the Bills and ice hockey, NHL. They are in a traditional market in the northeast on the border with Canada. In fact, a huge proportion of Buffalo's fan base comes from Ontario. They just cross the border from the greater Toronto area, because not everyone in Toronto is a Maple Leafs fan. And there's got to become a point where you've got to look at ownership as the problem, because so many GMs and coaches can't just be the problem. Lindy Ruff is a brilliant NHL coach. Look at his record overall. He is a brilliant head coach. Look how many games he's coached, how many wins he's had, how many playoff appearances. Lindy Ruff is a brilliant NHL coach. So, and he was the coach the last time they made the playoffs. So is this on the coach? I don't think so. Is this on the GM? Well, how many GMs have Buffalo had in this 14-year spell? Ultimately, I think ownership is the main cause of the problems here, because they're the ones who basically filtering down going, we're going to go for a rebuild. Will the rebuild ever end? Because will Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power, for example, as the two star players of the team, will they end up like Jack Eichel, where they're basically requesting a trade out of the organisation and they want to go elsewhere because they want to win? Because they do want to win. They want to win a Stanley Cup. They want to make the playoffs. And there's not a single player on this roster that has made the playoffs with the Sabres organisation. Not a single player. There are players on this roster that have made the playoffs with other organisations, but for whatever reason it is not working, and culture starts at the top, and there's not a winning culture in Buffalo. And in the last couple of seasons, fans have started to vote with their wallets and their feet because they're not turning up in the numbers that they were. Attendance has finally started to fall, which has got to be warning signs to ownership that the fan base has had enough. In fact, the fan base had enough quite a few years ago. Even with the expanded playoffs in 2020, the team was that bad they weren't in the play-in round. So this tells you that this rebuild, where they've got close in a couple of seasons, they got close to the playoffs, is not working. Whatever plans the ownership have, and the direction, what culture does the team have? What is the identity of the Buffalo Sabres? Because right now it's one of futility. But it's been 14 straight seasons. I mean, from the looks of it, it's probably going to be 15. I cannot see how, as things currently are, that anything's going to change. And there's not a winning culture there. And I would not be surprised if Darlene and Power, as the two star players that I mentioned and others will at some point decide not to re-sign contract extensions when they're UFA or RFA, and they probably request a trade. Because Jack Eichel was meant to be the saviour. He's gone. He's gone to Vegas. He's won a Stanley Cup with Vegas and was one of the main reasons why they won a Stanley Cup. And at some point, Rasmus Dahlin and Owen Power are going to look at this and go, are we better served playing elsewhere to achieve success? So there we go. Now that's my views on the Buffalo Sabres. I honestly think that in order to get back to where they were in the late 90s, early 2000s, when they were one of the best teams in the league and came so close, the foot in the crease incident in 99 against the Dallas Stars, but they were on the cusp of winning a Stanley Cup. If they want to get back there, drastic changes have to happen. And we're talking drastic. Not massively with the roster, I don't think, but drastic changes have to happen with ownership and the culture within the organisation, because you also have to look at the AHL affiliate and the ECHL affiliate to wonder why players aren't being developed in the way they should be, because I think that's part of the problem. Drafting, I don't necessarily think is an issue, because they've drafted some pretty good players. I don't think Lindy Ruff, the coach, is the issue. I don't think he's the problem. He's been thrown into the problem. But then you have to look at the GM, or GMs over the years, and go, well, what is the plan? What is the style of play they want? What is the culture they want? But ultimately, I think the issue lies with the ownership. But place your thoughts in the comments section below. I'd be very interested to hear from Buffalo Sabres fans about what is going on in the border regions of upstate New York. Can next season be a turning point? Will they make the playoffs? Will they ever make the playoffs? Because this is getting to a point now where there's a generation of fans growing up in the Buffalo metro area, young kids, teenagers, who've never seen this team make the playoffs. There's a whole roster of players that with this organisation have never made the playoffs. And at some point, there's only so many trades you can make. There's only so many players you can draft early on, first, second, third, fourth overall, before something else has to give. So, is it time for some new owners to come in and breathe fresh life into the organisation? Because that's what happened to Carolina, and it worked. A change in ownership was what the organisation needed. Is that what's needed in Buffalo? Who knows? But for me, for now, thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts in the comments section below, and I'll have some more content for you all very, very soon.